Welcome to the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
It's great to be here.
Today we're diving deep into super thinking. Upgrade your reasoning and make better decisions with mental models.
That's right. The 1 Hour Guide to the Book by Gabriel Weinberg and McCann.
Now, this isn't your typical business book.
Not at all.
It's more like a toolkit packed with these cognitive strategies.
Exactly.
To help you think more clearly and make sharper decisions in any part of your life.
And that's what makes this book so valuable.
Absolutely. And the key here is using what the authors call mental models.
Yes.
These are frameworks, or you could say like lenses from different fields.
Right. From psychology to physics to economics.
You can use them as shortcuts to understanding and solving problems more effectively.
They give you a new perspective.
So for you listening, you're someone who wants to absorb knowledge efficiently.
Yeah.
And this deep dive into super thinking is all about giving you the most important ideas.
The stuff you can actually use.
Right away, whether you're leading a team, starting a business, or just trying to make sense of the world around you.
It's about those aha moments.
Exactly. And we're going to do that all within the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
So where do we begin with super thinking?
Well, one of the most fundamental ideas that really struck me was the idea of being wrong less.
Right. Not trying to be right all the time.
Because let's face it, nobody's right all the time.
Exactly.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
But we can try to be wrong less often.
And that's the key to making better decisions.
So how do these mental models help us do that?
Well, one that comes to mind is inversion thinking.
Inversion thinking.
Yeah, it's about flipping the problem around.
Okay.
So instead of asking, how do I succeed? You ask, how could I fail?
Interesting.
Like if you're an entrepreneur launching a new product,
Right.
you'd think about all the reasons why it might not work.
Lack of market demand, maybe, or tough competition.
Exactly. And then you try to address those vulnerabilities.
That's a much more proactive approach.
It is.
Another model that I think is really important is KISS.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple,
Isn't
stupid.
it?
Right. It's a classic, but it's so true.
Absolutely.
Complexity often leads to more problems.
Yeah, more points of failure.
So by keeping things simple, you reduce the risk.
And make it easier to execute.
Then we have first principles thinking.
That's a good one.
This is about breaking down problems to their fundamental truths.
Instead of just relying on assumptions.
Right, like Elon Musk did with battery costs.
Exactly. He didn't just accept that batteries had to be expensive.
Right.
He went back to the basic materials and figured out a more efficient way to produce them.
That's a great example.
It's about questioning everything and understanding things from the ground up.
Now, a bias that I think we all fall prey to sometimes is the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
It's that feeling that you have to keep going with something just because you've already invested so much time or money into it.
Even if it's clearly not working.
Right, but we need to learn to cut our losses.
Recognize that past investments shouldn't dictate future decisions.
And then there's the availability bias.
Where we tend to overemphasize information that's readily available to us.
Like if you just watched a scary movie about sharks.
You might suddenly feel like shark attacks are much more common than they actually are.
Exactly, even though statistically they're extremely rare.
It's about being aware of how easily our perceptions can be swayed.
So moving on to the idea of anticipating unintended consequences.
Okay.
This is so important because our actions often have ripple effects that we don't foresee.
And that's where Murphy's Law comes in.
Right. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
It's a bit pessimistic, but it's a useful reminder to think ahead.
To try to identify those potential points of failure.
Absolutely.
Then we have the tragedy of the commons.
Which illustrates how individual self-interest can deplete shared resources.
Like overfishing.
Yeah, everyone wants to catch as many fish as they can, but it ends up harming the entire ecosystem.
It's a reminder of the importance of collective action and responsible resource management.
We need to consider the long-term consequences.
Now, risk compensation or moral hazard is an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's the idea that increased safety can actually lead to riskier behavior.
Because people feel more protected.
Right. Like drivers with anti-lock brakes might drive more aggressively.
Because they think the technology will save them.
It's a counterintuitive idea, but it's something to be aware of.
Then there's Goodhart's law,
which states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Like those old Soviet nail factories that were given quotas.
They started producing tons of tiny useless nails.
Just to meet the quota.
Exactly. It's a reminder to focus on the underlying goal, not just the metric.
And lastly, in this section, we have the Cobra effect.
Where a solution actually makes the problem worse.
Like the story of the British government in India offering a bounty for dead cobras.
People started breeding cobras to collect the bounty.
It completely backfired.
It's a classic example of unintended consequences.
Now let's talk about optimizing our most valuable resource, time.
Time is finite.
It is, and we need to be intentional about how we use it.
A great guiding principle here is the North Star model,
Which means defining your long-term objective,
your ultimate goal.
like DuckDuckGo's commitment to privacy.
That's their North Star, and it guides all their decisions.
And closely related to this is the idea of opportunity cost.
Understanding what you're giving up when you choose to do one thing over another.
Every decision has a trade-off.
So you need to weigh your options carefully.
Now, the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, is incredibly useful for time management.
It reminds us that 80% of our results usually come from just 20% of our efforts.
So we need to focus on those high-impact activities.
Identify the 20% that really matters.
And then there's the Eisenhower matrix, which helps you prioritize tasks based on urgency and importance.
That important but not urgent quadrant is where you want to spend more of your time.
Because that's where you make real progress on your long-term goals.
Exactly.
And Parkinson's law states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
Which means if you give yourself a week to do something, it'll take you a week.
But if you give yourself a day,
You might be able to get it done in a day.
it's a reminder to set deadlines and stick to them.
Create a sense of urgency.
Now, the book also explores the idea of working with natural laws,
Oh, yeah.
relating principles from the natural world to our own strategies.
Like inertia and adaptation.
Things at rest tend to stay at rest,
And businesses can be the same way.
resistant to change.
It takes a force to get them moving.
Like Amazon's constant push for innovation.
They're always adapting.
Then there's critical mass.
That tipping point where something becomes self-sustaining.
Like Tesla's electric cars.
Once they reached a certain level of
A
adoption,
momentum just kept building.
back.
An emergence.
How complex systems can arise from simple rules.
Like Wikipedia.
A decentralized platform with millions of contributors.
But it somehow works.
Self-organizing order.
In a world overflowing with data, the ability to interpret statistics critically is essential.
Absolutely, we need to be discerning consumers of information.
And one of the first things to consider is the source of the data.
Who collected it, and what are their potential biases?
We also need to be aware of hidden biases like survivorship bias,
Where we only focus on the successes and ignore the failures.
like analyzing damage on returning WWII aircraft.
You only see the planes that made it back.
You don't see the ones that were shot down.
Right, so you might draw the wrong conclusions about where to reinforce the armor.
It's a powerful reminder to look at the full picture.
And not just the data that's readily available.
Then there's the law of small numbers.
Which cautions us against drawing conclusions from limited data
We need a sufficiently large sample size.
to make statistically valid inferences.
Understanding data distribution is also crucial.
Knowing the difference between a normal bell curve and a skewed distribution.
It gives you a much clearer understanding of what the numbers actually mean.
And context is everything.
A number by itself doesn't tell you much.
You need to understand the story behind the data.
And finally, reproducibility is key in scientific research.
If a study's results can't be replicated,
Their validity is questionable.
it's a fundamental principle of science.
Now let's dive into decision-making.
This is where it all comes together.
One of the most basic tools is cost-benefit analysis.
Weighing the pros and cons,
But we also need to be aware of Hick's law,
which states that the more options you have,
the longer it takes to make a decision.
too much choice can lead to analysis paralysis.
So sometimes limiting your options can actually be helpful.
And then there's the challenge of preparing for unknown unknowns.
Things we can't even imagine.
Techniques like scenario planning and red teaming can help.
Where you try to find weaknesses in your plans.
It's about anticipating the unexpected,
And we also need to be aware of the paradox of choice.
where more options can actually lead to less satisfaction.
It sounds counterintuitive.
But it's true.
And finally, decision fatigue.
The idea that our mental energy for making decisions is limited.
Like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs wearing the same clothes every day.
To reduce the number of trivial decisions they have to make.
Now, conflict is an inevitable part of life.
And the book offers some valuable insights on navigating it strategically.
Understanding game theory can help you analyze the incentives at play.
Like the prisoner's dilemma.
It's a classic model of strategic interaction.
It shows how individual self-interest can sometimes lead to suboptimal outcomes.
Mastering principles of influence is also key.
Using persuasive techniques ethically.
Reframing a conflict can open up new possibilities for resolution.
Changing the way it's perceived.
Setting clear boundaries is important in negotiations.
So you don't get pushed into unfavorable compromises.
Sometimes the best strategy is to avoid conflict altogether.
Choose your battles wisely.
And sometimes you need to change the game entirely.
Redefine the rules of engagement.
Like Netflix did with Blockbuster.
They completely disrupted the video rental industry.
And always consider the long-term consequences of your actions.
A short-term win might not be worth a long-term loss.
Now let's shift our focus to unlocking people's potential.
This is crucial for leaders and anyone working in teams.
The concept of 10x teams is fascinating.
Teams that are 10 times more effective than average teams.
And role fit is essential.
Matching people's strengths and passions with their responsibilities.
It's amazing how much more productive people can be when they're in the right role.
It's about finding the sweet spot.
We also need to understand the difference between generalists and specialists.
And when to utilize each.
Generalists are good at connecting different ideas,
while specialists have deep expertise in specific areas.
the power of deliberate practice cannot be overstated.
It's the key to mastery.
Focused, intentional effort with feedback.
It's not just about putting in the hours.
And a growth mindset is essential.
The belief that abilities can be developed.
It's about embracing challenges.
And seeing effort as a path to growth.
And finally, building a strong team culture.
Where people feel motivated, trusted, and accountable.
That's the foundation for exceptional performance.
It's about creating an environment where people can thrive.
Now, the last section of the book explores the idea of flexing market power.
How to establish and maintain a competitive advantage.
It starts with identifying your secret sauce.
What makes you unique and difficult to copy?
But execution is just as important.
Turning your ideas into reality.
You need to build moats around your business.
Defensible advantages like intellectual property or brand loyalty.
And you need to be paranoid.
Always anticipating disruption.
Like Kodak's failure to adapt to digital photography.
They were once a giant, but they got complacent.
And finally, crossing the chasm.
Moving from early adopters to the mainstream market.
That's a challenge for many businesses.
It requires a different strategy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into super thinking,
Remember, this has been the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
it's clear that these mental models are powerful tools for improving our thinking.
They can help us make better decisions and achieve greater success.
Which mental models resonated most with you?
Which ones can you start applying in your own life?
Think about it.
Even small changes can make a big difference over time.
And don't forget, for more concise business insights,
Check out the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
a final thought for you.
What's one area where you think a mental model could provide immediate clarity?
It's worth pondering.
It is.
Thank you for joining us today.
You can buy the book at the 1 Hour Guide website for more business insights.
See you next time.
Take care.